Hello, I'm Sean Eubanks. I want to welcome you to jointventuresradio.com. Today we have Emma Chasen, who is our guest. After graduating from Brown University in 2014 with a degree in Medicinal Plant Research, Emma went on to coordinate clinical oncology trials with Brown University Oncology Research Group. When her supervisor refused a cannabis trial in favor of another expensive pharmaceutical drug, Emma quit and headed across the country to Portland, Oregon. She found her way to Pharma, the popular Portland dispensary that takes a more scientific approach to cannabis, rejecting the indica sativa binary and instead focusing on chemotypes to determine effect. She began her career at Pharma as a bud tender and was quickly promoted to general manager after only a few months. Emma Chasen was recently featured in named Portland's Best Bud Tender in 2016, and featured in Newsweek, MG Magazine, Stoner Magazine, High Times Magazine, The Oregon Leaf, and Teen Vogue for her work with cannabis and patients. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's great to have an actual scientist on here. I know it's incredible. You are obviously brilliant going to Brown University, and such a brave thing for you to do. You actually left Brown and then headed out to Portland. What made you go out to Portland?
Yeah, so I always, in anything I do, I think err on the bolder side of things. And really it was that moment when I was working in oncology research at Brown when my supervisor just laughed at a really brilliant professor who had proposed a cannabis trial. And I just thought to myself, you know what, this is not where I need to be. And so I had heard people talk so highly of Portland. I knew that there were kind of lax rules on cannabis, and somewhat spontaneously just decided to move here, try it out. And very synchronistically, I got here in September 2015, and adult use opened up in the cannabis industry in October 2015. So everyone was hiring. And so that's how I found my way to Pharma.
And so very humbling of you to say, you know what, I just want to get into this industry. I do find some of the people that are as successful as you are humble themselves and decide, you know what, I got to get on the ground level. So you went from Brown University right in as a bud tender. Was that just to learn? Obviously, you have you're ambitious, you're very intelligent. Was it just to get in at the ground level any way you possibly could?
It was. And it was really, I so aligned with Pharma's mission. I don't know if I could have done it at any other retail shop because, I mean, starting at $12 an hour coming from an Ivy League institution where I'm running research was definitely different. But I absolutely saw the potential, and I saw how much that specific dispensary supported its employees in education. And this is the kind of biggest tip or advice that I give to people who want to get into the industry is humble yourself, get in on the ground floor wherever you can, find people who will support you, and then really find your niche and just work your ass off to get where you want to be.
And with Pharma, tell us about that experience if you're walking into a dispensary, because they seem to be ahead of the game. I've always thought that education would lead the industry. I'm surprised here in Colorado how some dispensaries are just focused on making money and a certain demographic and making sure that they're getting more people in the doors. But I thought this would be mostly tilted towards education. So walk me through the experience of Pharma when you walk in the door and how they educate their consumers.
Yeah. So when you walk into Pharma, you won't see anything labeled by indica sativa, which is huge for people. I think that that's really the biggest point of education that they focus on, and that we should all, as an industry, be focusing on to increase the predictability of cannabis and cannabis medicine, which is already such a variable product. You need to be looking at the actual chemical compounds found inside every single chemovar or strain, as we call them now. And that means looking at THC, CBD percentage, as well as terpene content, instead of the kind of antiquated indica sativa model. And so when you walk into Pharma, you'll see it has its chemovars divided by kind of relaxing, uplifting, and it does display both THC, CBD, and terpene content on all of its display tags. And the employees there are instructed to guide people through the different chemical compounds found in every single strain so that they can best tailor the customer's kind of desired experience to the chemical compounds found in the strain, all while being very accessible, since it is and it can get to be this sort of like really scientific conversation. So it's all about really marrying, okay, how do we introduce these scientific terms in layman's language that will not only get people excited about them, but also be able to understand them. And I think that pharma does do that really well.
You know, such a simple, subtle change, I think, but an incredible thing for the industry is why not focus on the treatment, right? Why not focus on what you're going to feel? I mean, I would go, if you're going to tell me, if I'm walking in for the first time, I don't know what indica means, but I know what relax means. I know what lowering anxiety means. So you actually, then of course you get elevated to director of education. What's the biggest thing you saw people coming in for? And I can imagine, Emma, people were just appreciated. They're like, oh my gosh, this retail location is actually going to educate me. So I imagine that there were lines out the door, a great demand for that. What's the big thing that you found as director of education for pharma that people kept asking for over and over again?
Definitely. So I saw mostly people asking about CBD. I think that the CBD market is really rising. And just like you said, how indica and sativa, that language could kind of put people off in a way who have never used cannabis before, who don't really know what's going on there. Those terms can be a bit alienating. And so with CBD and the rise of the CBD kind of trend, I think it's really exciting because it brings more people in to a market that they would otherwise kind of not engage with because of the intoxicating effects of THC. And so we saw so many consumers coming in or new customers who wanted to know about CBD, specifically hemp-derived CBD versus cannabis-derived CBD. I'd say that was the most frequently asked question that we got.
And were you able to offer CBD-only products, or were you regulated in a way that you had to have some THC involved as well?
So we did have both THC, both CBD. We could have cannabis-derived CBD as well as hemp-derived CBD products. So we were able to carry pretty much everything in the adult use market, which was great, just to offer more opportunity to engage with different products for our consumers.
And when people asked you the main difference between hemp and cannabis, how did that start out? And kind of walk us through a road that people would get to go, okay, I'm either picking the hemp side or picking the cannabis side, and this product is for me.
Sure. So we did have a lot of people who came in who had already tried a hemp-derived CBD product, something that they found on Amazon that didn't really work for them. And so they were coming into the shop already with a little bit of frustration because they didn't understand why this CBD product that they had heard such kind of miraculous effects about wasn't working for them. And so it was a point of education where we had to say, you know what, the CBD market is rising. There is a trend in popularity here. And that unfortunately means that a lot of companies will take advantage of that. And so hemp-derived CBD products that you find on Amazon, most likely they are snake oil. They are some type of elixirs. That's not to say that all hemp-derived CBD companies are that way. However, it's incredibly important when sourcing your CBD that you do some research on the company. Inquire about their testing methodologies. Do they send their product for analytical testing? Do they test for not only potency, so CBD concentration, but also pesticide residue, because hemp and cannabis, those plants, they are bioaccumulators. So they will soak up whatever you put into it. And so if the inputs are not clean and organic and pesticide free, then you could be purchasing a product that may do more harm than good because of the pesticide residue. So that was the kind of first conversation or the first kind of like pronged approach to explain why the hemp-derived product that a consumer had purchased didn't work in the first place. And then it was a deeper conversation of CBD can work. It can have really miraculous effects. It does have amazing potential in its ability to relieve so many different types of symptoms. However, you just need to make sure that you are purchasing a product from an ethical company that actually does have a measurable concentration of CBD and that is free from any kind of pesticides.
And when people lean towards hemp or cannabis after talking to you at the retail location, would they make a decision either way?
So if they were in an adult use state, so if they did find me at pharma and talk to me at pharma, then I would encourage them to try something that's cannabis derived. And this is why. So cannabis has just a greater range of secondary compounds within its matrix. The drug cultivar, quote unquote, cannabis was specifically bred for its secondary compounds, THC, CBD, terpenes, and the entourage effect is a theory that tells us that all of those compounds work synergistically. They work together to produce the most medically efficacious experience possible. And so even though CBD derived from hemp is the same exact compound as CBD derived from cannabis, in your cannabis kind of derived medicines or products, you will have more of those secondary compounds that support CBD's ability to relieve symptoms. Whereas in hemp was bred for its primary compounds, fiber, its ability to clean up soil, proteins, all of that kind of stuff. So it was never bred for a diverse range of secondary compounds, and therefore CBD doesn't have the support like it does with cannabis. And so for people who do have access to legal cannabis, they would go with cannabis-derived CBD medicines. Right. For those who don't have access and who live in prohibition states, hemp-derived CBD is often the only option. And so then it becomes a conversation of, okay, let's just find you a really good, reputable company who does produce ethical products. Yeah, and that's a great point. I appreciate you rounding that off like that, because people are trying CBD, and it's exactly that point. Can't be shipped, and states that you have prohibition still going on. That's a great point there. Isn't it amazing, Emma, that they tried to breed CBD out of cannabis in the beginning? I know. It's insane. I mean, I even remember like 4 years ago when I was still living in New York. I'm a born and raised New Yorker, and I got some weed, and I just like thought it was like bunk weed. I was like, oh man, my dealer screwed me because I'm not getting high right now. And looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I must have had a strain that was high in CBD that I didn't even know about at the time. And so it's really amazing to see the rise of CBD, to see it get its kind of like moment of fame, and to just expand the conversation other than THC, because for so long weed was just synonymous with THC, and it's so much more than that. Yeah, and I have to have faith that we could have bred it back in, or some brilliant guys could have done that. But man, what a risk, and it's amazing. But you know what? It's a black market, and there's no research, and that's the broader point here, is that this plant needs to be opened up to everybody for the research purposes, and that's the reason I believe the biggest threat to cannabis, to people, these other industries that are actively working against them, and there's a list, they have addresses, they're well known, it's very straightforward. They're worried about the research of this plant, because simple compounds, much like CBD, we just didn't know in the beginning, or the ancestors didn't understand, and they tried to breed that out, thought it was useless, but there's so much more about this plant that needs to be discovered. Exactly. And we're just kind of at the front lines of it. We're just starting to really uncover the potential. And especially if the research trends in such a way that I think it will, that will really encourage a more nutraceutical approach, where you are searching for and seeking out whole plant medicine. So like cannabis flower, or even tinctures that seek to preserve the full range of secondary compounds. That's not good for pharmaceutical companies. No. That completely goes against what pharmaceutical companies basically package as medicine, which is an isolate of a compound. And so it's very threatening, but we're at this point where it's almost a civil rights issue that people don't have access to this information that really could save their life.
Well, in the beginning, the early 70s, the Nixon administration, they tried this. They said with Marinol, they tried to isolate, and they realized and quickly found out, look, it's not working. And whether or not everyone identified it back then as the entourage effect or not, really not important. But the fact is, they were just knew, hey, this pharmaceutical grade cannabis isn't as effective as it is grown in nature, frankly.
Right. And so what do? They make it illegal for anybody to grow it.
That's right.
Which is insane. I mean, it's really exciting to be at this point in time, at this point of history, where states are starting to kind of like wake up to the power of this plant, not only, of course, medically and from a healthcare perspective, but also economically, and also in its ability to really help kind of turn around the opioid epidemic. I mean, there's hardly any kind of dangers that you can really believe anymore about cannabis. So it's making it harder and harder for lawmakers to stand up against it.
Yeah. Emma, we do need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be rejoined by Emma Chasen, who is a cannabis educator and industry consultant. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Joint Ventures Radio. I'm your host, Sean Eubanks. We have been talking to Emma Chasen, who is a cannabis educator and industry consultant and alumni of Brown University. Emma, welcome back.
Thanks so much. Love being here.
Absolutely. So we covered a lot in the first segment. Let's talk about, so you went from, obviously started at the ground up, humbled yourself, went from Brown University, Ivy League, all the way as a bud tender, worked your way up to director of education, and then you went over and joined forces with Sativa Science Club.
I did, yeah. And that came out of a need that I saw for a really comprehensive, standardized training curriculum for the retail professionals in this industry. And that is really a mission of mine, to provide more support to our bud tenders, to our retail cannabis professionals, because they are the crucial link between the consumer market and the rest of the industry. I mean, they simultaneously represent the makers and the processors and producers of the cannabis industry, and help advise people and consumers and customers and patients who have no idea about this plant. And they often advise them on like healthcare issues, even if it's just an issue of insomnia and anxiety. So it was really unbelievable to me and inexcusable that there was no kind of standard training on the fundamentals of cannabis science, product knowledge, and client care. And so that's where I joined forces with Sativa Science Club to create that training for the industry.
And so that's the core science certification. Is that for consumers to go and learn, or is it for retailers to get that certification? Tell me the backbone of Sativa Science Club.
So it was designed for the retail cannabis professional. That's where we kind of had our target audience there. But I have taught it now for the last year, and I continue to teach it apart from Sativa Science Club. And it really can be for anyone, lay enthusiast and other industry professional as well.
Okay, and Sativa Science Club, what are, I love the website. They've actually got a great podcast as well. What's the biggest takeaway, and what's your hope for Sativa Science Club to grow? I mean, how are they going to get the word out and continue to serve the industry?
Sure. So for clarification, I only worked on the core science certification with Sativa Science Club. Okay. So I'm not necessarily involved with long-term mission of the business, but I do know that the founder, Mary, does really want it to be an educational resource hub for the industry nationwide. So really just being able to provide the best information possible, as well as networking opportunities for the industry as well.
Okay, and shifting gears towards the combination, terpenes and the entourage effect and the education of cannabis. I've been in this industry for a couple of years, and it makes sense to me, and I can sort of compartmentalize and focus and go, all right, this is what I need to learn next. But give us the basics, a couple of terpenes and how they interact, and sort of a starting guide for our listeners to say, look, this is the type of cannabis you should be seeking out, and here are the effects that should be associated with it to kind of get your kind of dip a toe in the water.
Sure. So to begin, I'll just give kind of simple definition of terpenes that I use. They are really teeny tiny aromatic compounds. So they do give cannabis and many other plants their smell, but they also do correlate to certain physiological experiences. And we consume terpenes all day, every day without even knowing it. And they are found so abundantly in cannabis that we think that they're really the ones responsible for the more nuanced effects, whether it be really sleepy or really energizing or silly or giggly or sexy or whatever it may be, any of those experiences on that spectrum. And the two terpenes that I use to kind of introduce people to this idea is one, myrcene. So myrcene is found probably most abundantly in cannabis, and it's also found in hops. So think when you drink a beer or 5 beers and you begin to feel really drowsy. Well, yes, that's in part due to the alcohol content, but also due to the high concentration of myrcene in hops. And that's what myrcene will also deliver when in high concentrations in the cannabis matrix, a really kind of sleepy, sedative experience, where on the other hand, there is a terpene called limonene. And limonene is found in the rinds of our citrus fruits. So think when you bust that citrus open in the morning and you get that little lift of euphoria. Well, that's limonene doing its job. And that's also the reason why many of the citrus smelling strains do give a more kind of mood elevating, euphoric experience. And so those are the kind of the two terpenes that are on the opposite sides of the spectrum. And then you could play around in between with other terpenes like linalool, which is found in lavender, also abundantly found in cannabis, which gives a nice de-stressing, calming experience. Pinene, found in pine needles, also found in cannabis, that gives a more kind of heightened presence, alertness, clarity experience. So there are many ones that you can kind of start to really pick out the different smells. Citrus and a kind of grassy, earthy hoppiness. They're easy to pick out, but you can definitely get into the more spicy notes, which is correlated to caryophyllene, which gives a more anti-anxiety mood elevation. So there's a lot to play around with in there, and I mean I could go on forever, but really the two main ones to start is myrcene and limonene are good markers.
That's a wonderful introduction. One thing I've heard, Emma, is that I love this metaphor. It's that THC and CBD are the car, the terpenes are the driver of that car. Yes, absolutely. And I say that THC and CBD are the engine of the car, and the terpenes are like the steering wheel. Really the cannabinoids are going to kickstart the experience. They're the ones that are going to keep it driving forward. But the terpenes are going to move it in a certain direction, whether it be more sleepy or more uplifted, energized. Well, and you talked about Lilanol, which I love. And so Lilanol, for our listeners, that is found in lavender, right? And when you go to nutraceutical side of things, you can see, okay, everyone's using lavender to kind of relax. They'll use it at night, aromatherapy and all those things. So there's a good way to relate to that. And I love that you brought pinene up and the pine needles. People that have a chance here in Colorado or other places to walk out in nature, Oregon, of course, you get that pine sense. You're wondering, why do I feel so uplifted and energetic and almost spiritual to a point to where it's just incredible, relaxing experience. Or a more connected experience, should we say, because it can be uplifting. But Emma, talk to us a little bit about it. That's not all. In other words, you can't just get a pine cone and smell it. It needs to, and this is where people might disagree with me, but this is where the science meets it, is that you've got to combine it with the THC and the CBD. You have to combine it with that plant. You can't just walk up and smell a pine cone and then be all good.
Right. Exactly. And that's the power of cannabis, is in the combination of its secondary compounds within the plant matrix. And if you did want to have an only kind of terpene-centric experience, play around with essential oils. But
Right.
essential oils aren't going to necessarily help you fight cancer or help you fight these kind of bigger
Right.
illnesses. You need the combination of other terpenes and cannabinoids all working together to deliver that more medically efficacious experience. And that's just because of the way that they all interact with our receptors in our physiology.
Well said, and I hope people are following this because it's so important. Shifting gears, Emma, there's a lot of, as you know, the industry is changing, and I feel like it reinvents itself every 6 weeks or so, maybe 8 weeks from now. It's kind of slowed down a little bit, which is exciting and fun. But there's a lot of opportunists that will start to sort of understand that they're being sold against. They understand that their extraction method, or the way they're going about things, is actually stripping out the essential terpenes and kind of ruining the entourage effect. And I want to get your opinion, Emma, on the fact that there are companies that are going, number one, as a part of the extraction process, they're pulling out terpenes altogether and using it, and they're selling them off, and that's become a massive market in itself. Are you on board with stripping out and putting it back in, or are you more of on the natural side with, hey, take the full spectrum plant as it is, do it the right way, and use what's actually in the plant? Or are you on the more, dare I say, Frankenstein model?
So definitely not so much on the Frankenstein model. I definitely am a supporter of the nutraceutical approach of whole plant medicine, of preserving those secondary compounds. I'm not so much a concentrate girl myself, so it's not what I like to consume, but I also think that everybody should have access to what they want and what works for them.
Sure.
I do support CO2 distillation that goes through a subcritical extraction first, that helps to actually preserve the terpenes that were originally in that plant matrix, and then reintroduces those cannabis-derived terpenes at the end of the extraction process. I think that that's the best way to preserve terpenes in, like, your CO2 oil, and I think that that's fine. I'm not a fan of introducing food-grade or synthetic terpenes at the end of the extraction process to create, like, a bubblegum strain is flavored bubblegum. I think that is frankly disgusting.
Well, and you touch on that, Emma, because it's kind of where the market is, right? It's where they're focused on, okay, we're calling this OG Kush. The consumer is used to it tasting a certain way, not so much the effects of the terpenes, but how things taste. It seems that they're just trying to sort of mimic that versus create something authentic that actually has the desired effect.
Exactly. And really the reason why I am against that or not in support of it is because when you do heat those synthetic food grade terpenes at high temperatures, even if it's in a vape pen, it's still a high enough temperature to turn those terpenes into potentially toxic compounds. And so that's just, again, doing more harm than good. I think that we always have to step back and remember that this is a medicinal plant and people are using it for medicinal purposes, health and wellness. In my opinion, the line between recreational consumption and medical consumption is very blurred with cannabis. I mean, sure, if you are like really wasted out of your mind at 2 a.m. and smoking a joint, that could be recreational. But if you're using it like a glass of wine at the end of the day to relax, to me, that's still medicinal. And so we need to be really careful with the inputs in our products to make sure that people aren't doing more harm than good.
Well, and you mentioned CO2 extraction, and for our listeners, I hope we're still here with this, and because it's just a phenomenal introduction that you're giving us, Emma. I'm very grateful for you being on the podcast here. The thing is, well, tell us, is there anything that any type of extraction method, or if someone's getting into this, to watch out for? In other words, if it's just supercritical first on the CO2 extraction side, or another form of extraction where you're like, oh no, that's not going to achieve what you want, reintroducing terpenes that way.
Yeah, so I would be careful about the CO2 vape pens that do reintroduce terpenes, synthetic or food-grade terpenes, as well as oil that doesn't have a high viscosity, because that usually means that it's cut with something called propylene glycol, which makes it easier to vape the oil, but also is not good for you if it's heated and consumed. So watch out for that. And then definitely watch out for BHO, butane hash oil, as well as PHO, propane hash oil. Those are concentrates made with high heat, high pressure, and butane or propane. So you can have residual amounts of butane, and oftentimes there are concentrate makers who will kind of reintroduce those terpenes at the end of the extraction process, food-grade synthetic terpenes. And when you dab terpenes at that high of a temperature, there is research to suggest that those terpenes could turn into potentially toxic compounds. So definitely watch out for those as well. If you are in search of a concentrate, if that's the way that you like to consume, then look for a CO2 oil, a CO2 vape pen that is very viscous and that does not reintroduce those synthetic terpenes.
I love it, Emma. You're pulling back the curtain and talking about viscosity, because that's what's being sold out there. When you go to these trade shows, it's, oh yeah, this pen works because of, it'll pass through the pen easier and all those things. And you're like, how? What are you cutting it with? What are you putting in there that makes it do that? So I love that you're doing that. We do need to take a quick break, Emma. When we come back, we'll be joined by Emma Chasen, who is a scientist, a former Ivy Leaguer who has graced us with her presence in this industry. Don't go away. When you come back, we'll be rejoined by Emma. You're listening to jointventuresradio.com. Welcome back to Joint Ventures Radio. I'm your host, Sean Eubanks, CEO of Renaissance Consulting, and we have been listening to Emma Chasen. Emma, welcome back.
Thanks so much.
All right, so we covered a lot of things. Thank you so much for the educational first couple of segments. How does a firm reach out to you or get started and start understanding how to vet these consultants and how to get educated and implement that in an affordable way into their business?
Sure. So, first off, you can find me almost anywhere. I do have a website, which is just my name, emmachasen.com, as well as I'm on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. So please find me and reach out. I love having these kinds of conversations with people, and I am here to help, whether it be on certain cannabis science questions as related to health and wellness, or if it's a bigger conversation of how do we implement education into our business with hardly any money and hardly any bandwidth. And that's where I kind of come in and help to deliver my expertise, because it doesn't take that much money. It doesn't take that much bandwidth to implement education. And all you need to do is really kind of know how to analyze lab results, know how to look for terpenes, how to analyze those terpenes, and also just give somebody the kind of responsibility to create an in-house education program. And that's something that I've walked many businesses through in just creating kind of a weekly education program where you invite people in from the industry to talk to staff, creating certain analyses of different strains that staff can have access to. And those analyses would be on the kind of cannabinoids and terpenes and the genetics and how they all work together to produce a certain predicted experience. So it's not hard, and really I'm seeing it more and more that people are kind of saying, oh, you know what? Education makes sense for what we're doing. If we look to long-term strategy, the only way that dispensaries are going to be able to really differentiate themselves is with staff. And you need to provide staff with at least some kind of foundational education, which is also why I offer many workshops and online webinar-based training for businesses as well.
That's such a great thing that you're doing, and I totally agree with you. I mean, at the retail level, why not just embrace it? You have to educate consumers. Why not go all in and not only give them lab results and not to confuse them, but go ahead and market those lab results and start selling against your competition?
Right, exactly. And I think that a lot of businesses in this industry definitely had a mentality of green rush. Some still do that, oh, if you build it, they will come. But guess what? It's going to get mundane pretty quickly as soon as everybody has legal weed and they can only sell certain products that are within their local jurisdiction. How are you going to stand out from the competition? How are you going to stand out from the rest with your staff? If your staff is educated, they can help your consumers better. They can make more accurate predictions for how a certain product will make a customer feel, and that will increase customer loyalty.
Well, it's interesting. We're here in Colorado, and I get to go around and shop different bud tenders. I think there's some brilliant bud tenders, and there's some others who are just not as focused, and they don't have the desire to educate. But one of the things that I kind of make this leap in logic, and maybe you'll disagree with me here, Emma, but I'll ask them, okay, how's it extracted? And I'll ask questions, and these smart bud tenders, very informed and very excited and enthusiastic and wanting to educate people about cannabis, they won't know, or they'll look at me kind of taken aback, go, why are you asking that? Or they'll answer it. And so what that is an indicator for me, Emma, that there's not a lot of retail customers yet digging into the type of extraction, and maybe it's a confidence level, right? It can be overwhelming if you're just getting thrown a bunch of information. But there doesn't seem to be much demand at the retail level that I observe here in Colorado, at least, for them digging into that type of extraction and wanting to understand kind of what's in it just yet.
And I think that's exactly why the retail side of the industry in general, kind of needs to take that on to better be able to service a larger consumer market. Because at least here in Oregon and in some other states that have gone legal, the population of cannabis consumers is not really growing.
Right.
And I think that's because, of course, there are still negative stigmas associated with cannabis, but also because there's a lot of intimidation on the side of customers or potential customers who could benefit from cannabis, who don't want to walk into a dispensary because they're not too sure about what type of information they're going to get, and they don't really know if the level of information is going to be reputable and accurate. And so I think that's why the cannabis industry kind of needs to take the lead on that, because if we do want to be successful, we need to pull in as many people as possible. And there are definitely people out there who want more information, who are hungry for this information, who just don't know where to get it. And so to those dispensaries, I kind of say, well, be that place where people, seniors, moms, any of these kind of demographics that could benefit from cannabis, who are otherwise not really engaging with it because of the lack of retail operations that do have reputable information.
Do you think it's also price protection in a way, Emma? In other words, for someone to guarantee you, even if I have a certain strain or a couple of strains in an edible, I just can't guarantee your experience at 10 milligrams. Like the reason why I'm saying this is because if I'm a mom and I'm wanting to try cannabis and I want to try 2.5 milligrams or 5 milligrams, it has to be something very, very predictable. And I just don't know that we're there I know we're not there as an industry, but also as a consumer, it just sounds like there's going to be a massive price hike for me to tell you 2.5 milligrams in a lozenger with this strain is going to have these effects, and I'm actually extracting and infusing only this one strain, and that sort of consistency to where it's actually acting like medicine, it just seems like that's going to be really, really expensive for the consumer.
Yeah, and it's also going to be really hard, because even if we do kind of create this product that we think has all this consistency, I mean, everyone has their own unique endocannabinoid receptor system and can respond to it in very unique different ways. And so instead, what I'm more interested in is creating a dialogue with the consumer where we say up front, you know what, this is rather unpredictable. This does have some high levels of variability, but here are the ways that you can take charge of your own experience. One, it's not going to kill you. I mean, there's no reported lethal dose of cannabis yet, because there are no receptors that are on the part of the brainstem that actually regulates cardiorespiratory function. And so it can't shut down your heart, can't shut down your lungs, can't shut down your brain. So right there at the baseline, feel comfortable with that. It can't kill you. and then we can give them kind of certain tips and tricks to make them feel more empowered in their own experience, make them feel more empowered to experiment with this product until they find what works for them. And that is a conversation of microdosing. Start with 2.5 milligrams, take it in the evening, don't take any more, as well as a conversation about tracking their own experience, using a consumption journal to really take notes about the product that they're consuming, the time of day, who they're with, how much water they've had, how much food they've eaten. All of that goes into the experience. And of course, giving them some kind of tips if the experience does get uncomfortable, if there's anxiety, paranoia, elevated heart rate, that CBD is always an option. I call it the EpiPen of cannabis, that you can have some on hand and it will immediately kind of reduce those more uncomfortable side effects. So there are certain conversations that we can have with a consumer to help them to get to a place where they find a product that consistently works from them. I don't think that it necessarily needs to come from the product engineering side.
Well said. And, do you agree with this, Emma, that, if you can, you have a ratio of CBD to THC? I think you've kind of spoken to that. But also, I when I'm sharing with people, I just say, lower your expectations. I'll have a 10 milligram edible in the evening, and my expectations are low. That is recreational to me. So if I get a little bit too high or have a different experience, I'm still on my couch watching Netflix or watching basketball or whatever I'm doing. So my expectations are lower, therefore it's a better experience for me.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I always recommend, especially with novice consumers, consume in the evening. Make sure that you are in for the night. You have nowhere else to go. Do not plan on having this kind of like new consumption experience at a concert or a festival or like any kind of like trip. Don't put big plans on it, at least until you figure out your target dose that works really well for you. And then you can kind of explore other avenues of consumption.
And do not go to Costco. I'm not saying me, but a friend of mine was stuck on the other side of Costco when that edible hit him, and he's like, I don't know that I can make it to the front door. I don't know that I can go all the way out. Like, that's 5 football fields to my car, and I wish I would have known.
Yeah, with like a sea of crazy humans. I once was a little too high at Costco on a Sunday at noon, and I was like, I hate this place. This is hell. This is hell. But the good thing is, again, it won't kill you. You'll ride it through. Even if you have some anxiety, some paranoia, make sure you surround yourself with good people in, of course, a comfortable space that is not Costco, and it will pass.
For sure. And one of the the business model of Costco and the theory behind that and the Sam's Club is that people are going to spend more in bulk. But I've had epiphanies in there, and I kind of walk around. It's like the anti-consumption drug marijuana is, because you're like, I don't need that. I don't need that. I'm not going to buy that. And you end up taking stuff out of your basket, which I'm sure Costco doesn't appreciate.
That's so true. I think that also may be why in my conspiracy theory brain, why the government does not want us to have access to it.
Well, absolutely. I agree with that. And there's a lot that we don't do, and you have to be made to feel like there's a void in your life to constantly pursue brand new shiny things, buying all these things. And cannabis, I'm not saying it fills that void. I'm not going to make that claim, but it sure slows the brain down enough to where you're not chasing things. All of a sudden, being around your family, being around your friends, being around people you love is good enough. It's not about a new car, a bigger house, or impressing people. It is a psychological change that I believe there's a number to that. There's a number and a dollar amount that affects certain industries.
Absolutely. Yeah, it just makes you really content with life most of the time for most people, and of course it has incredible medical potential. So it's a really wonderful thing for humans, not such a wonderful thing for the powers that be.
I do make some bold claims. I'm comfortable around CBD. Emma, tell me if you agree with this. When someone's using a tincture or something along those lines, you're not going to OD on CBD, and you're not going to ever have the psychological psychic effects of that. So, I'm very liberal when it comes to CBD uses, and I don't mind just taking more CBD.
Yes, definitely. And where the starting dose for a novice consumer for THC is pretty strictly recommended at 2.5 milligrams. The starting dose for experimenting with CBD, you can range anywhere from 5 to 20 milligrams for your starting dose. That's not to say that everybody will have good experiences with CBD. I know some people that have actually a pretty incredible psychoactive experiences or have had anecdotal evidence of those kind of almost hallucinatory experiences with CBD, which I find really interesting. I've known other people who get really rageful on CBD, but those are definitely the atypical experiences. Typically, people don't experience any kind of intoxicating effects. It's still psychoactive because it does engage with receptors in our psyche, in our brain, to help us feel more relaxed, less anxious. So if you do take enough of it, the best way that I've described the feeling of kind of a high CBD dose is if you've sat in a hot tub for like 5 hours and you get up and you're just kind of like woozy and heavy and really relaxed, that is pretty analogous to a high CBD experience.
Nice. With the time that we have left, Emma, tell me one thing that you wish you would have known before you got in this industry.
Don't trust everybody who kind of like proposes really big, shiny, fast money. I think that a lot of people are really excited about this industry, and a lot of people want to collaborate and work together and create all these amazing things because there's so much room for innovation and creativity since we've never done it before. But there are also a lot of people who don't want to do the hard work to get there. And so I think that it's really important for anybody who is coming into this industry to really be discerning with who you want to work with, who you want to collaborate with, because many people, while they're very excited, they don't necessarily have the work ethic to back it up.
And what's your one hope for the industry, Emma?
I hope that the industry moves in a more nutraceutical approach. I really hope that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't co-opt it from us and make it fit more into an allopathic approach. I know that there's going to be that fight in the future, but I do hope that the nutraceutical kind of craft industry can prevail.
Well, Emma, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Just a great conversation today. I love how you break things down, you simplify it, and I can imagine that's how you teach. And I want to implore everyone out there to reach out to www.emmachasen.com, get in touch with you, and retailers, consumers alike. And I appreciate so much what you're doing for the industry.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It was such a pleasure to chat with you.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of JointVenturesRadio.com. You can download episodes of our program by going to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and now on iHeartRadio. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.